Sometimes the most extraordinary stories don't begin with fireworks or headlines. They begin quietly, behind closed doors, in a mansion no one ever sees, where the walls are tall, the curtains heavy, and silence becomes its own kind of prison. This is the story of Richard Caldwell, a man known to the world as a billionaire tycoon. To the public, he was the image of success, tall, sharp, untouchable, always in his custom-tailored suits. Business magazines praised him, calling him ruthless but brilliant. Investors admired his empire, and newspapers printed his photo with headlines that described him as a man who never bends. But behind the polished image, Richard lived in a home that didn't echo with laughter or joy. His fortune had bought him everything: mansions, private jets, luxury cars. Everything but the one thing he desperately longed for: his daughter's happiness. Her name was Emily. She was only 11, with golden hair that caught the light like spun silk and big blue eyes that seemed to hold entire oceans of silence. Emily was born into privilege, but her childhood had been stolen by tragedy. An accident had left her paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair that seemed to shrink her world. Doctors had done what they could. Therapists had been hired the best money could buy, but no treatment brought back the spark she once had. Instead, Emily grew quieter, retreating into herself, her laughter fading into rare, fragile smiles that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. And so, the mansion grew quieter too. Richard, who once believed he could control everything in life, found himself powerless in the face of his daughter's condition. He poured himself deeper into his work, building walls of meetings, deals, and numbers to escape the reality he couldn't change. But inside that mansion, there was someone else who saw what Richard missed. Her name was Mariah. She was the maid, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a strength carved from years of hard work. She wasn't rich, she didn't wear diamonds or designer clothes, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that no wealth could ever buy. Mariah's job was simple: keep the mansion spotless, handle the daily tasks, and stay invisible, as most staff in households like this were expected to do. Yet Mariah had something Richard didn't have: the ability to notice small things. She noticed the way Emily's eyes followed music playing faintly from a television. She noticed how the girl's hands tapped lightly against her wheelchair armrest, as though her body still remembered rhythms her legs could no longer follow. And Mariah wasn't alone in that house. She had a daughter of her own, a bright, bubbly little girl named Aaliyah. Aaliyah was only 9, but her world couldn't have been more different from Emily's. Where Emily was silent, Aaliyah was full of life. Where Emily sat still, Aaliyah spun in circles, laughing, dancing to tunes only she seemed to hear. She didn't have ballet lessons or expensive dance studios. She didn't wear silk or satin slippers, but she had joy, raw and unfiltered, that flowed from her like sunlight. Mariah often worried that her daughter's energy might be too much for the quiet mansion. She reminded Aaliyah to stay out of sight, to respect the Caldwell family's privacy. After all, in houses like these, staff and their families were expected to remain unseen. But fate has a way of ignoring rules. It started small. One rainy afternoon, while Mariah was polishing the silver in the dining room, Aaliyah wandered into the hallway where Emily sat by the window. Emily's wheelchair faced the garden, her eyes lost in the drizzle streaking the glass. At first, neither girl spoke. Emily glanced at Aaliyah, then quickly looked away. She wasn't used to other children being around. She wasn't used to anyone looking at her without pity. But Aaliyah, in her innocence, didn't see Emily's wheelchair as a boundary. She tilted her head, smiled, and without saying a word, began to dance. It wasn't a formal dance, no rehearsed steps, no careful choreography, just a little girl spinning and twirling in her plain cotton dress, pretending the marble hallway was a stage and the rain outside was music. For the first time in weeks, Emily's lips curved into something almost forgotten, a smile. It was small at first, uncertain, but real. And Aaliyah noticed. She giggled and twirled faster, her arms stretched wide like wings, her bare feet slapping softly against the polished floor. Emily's eyes lit up, her hands lifting slightly from her lap, as though wanting to join in, even if her legs could not. That moment, it was nothing more than two little girls sharing a secret spark, but it planted something deeper. The days that followed turned that spark into a quiet ritual. Whenever Mariah was busy and the mansion halls were empty, Aaliyah would find Emily. And Emily, who once sat in silence, began waiting for her. Sometimes Aaliyah danced silly, pretending to be a ballerina. Sometimes she twirled dramatically, acting like a movie star on stage. Other times she just hopped around, making up moves as she went, laughing at her own mistakes. And every time, Emily's smile grew wider. She clapped softly, laughed quietly, and one day she even whispered, "Again." For Mariah, who sometimes peeked from the doorway, the sight brought tears to her eyes. She knew it was risky. If Mr. Caldwell found out his maid's daughter was distracting Emily, he might not approve. Wealthy families often valued order and rules above warmth, and yet, how could anyone stop something so pure? Mariah chose silence. She let it continue, believing that sometimes the smallest joys are worth the greatest risks. What no one knew was that Richard Caldwell himself was about to stumble upon this secret world, and when he did, what happened next would stun everyone. The house was always quiet when Richard Caldwell returned home. The heavy oak doors opened with ceremony, but no one ran to greet him. His footsteps echoed against marble floors, accompanied only by the rustle of servants who bowed their heads and disappeared into corners. To Richard, it was normal. He wasn't a man who expected affection, he expected respect. But what he didn't know was that in the quiet corners of his mansion, affection was blossoming in ways money could never buy. It happened one late afternoon. Richard had come home earlier than usual, the weight of an unfinished deal pressing against his mind. He loosened his tie, his brow furrowed, as he walked down the hallway toward his study. But as he approached, a sound stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't silence. It wasn't the hum of the air conditioning or the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. It was laughter. High-pitched, light, bubbling laughter that hadn't echoed in this house for years. Emily's laughter. Richard froze. For a moment, he wondered if he'd imagined it. His daughter's laughter had become a memory, a sound he only recalled from old home videos, from birthdays before the accident, from summer days before the chair. He hadn't heard it in so long that it almost hurt to recognize it. Curiosity pulled him forward, quietly, step by step, until he reached the doorway of the grand hall. He leaned slightly, careful not to be seen, and what he saw made his chest tighten. Emily sat in her wheelchair, her face glowing, her hands clapping together in excitement. In front of her, twirling, spinning, and jumping with wild abandon, was Aaliyah, Mariah's daughter. She was dancing not with grace or polish, but with freedom, the kind of freedom children carry when they don't know the world is watching. Her dress flared with each spin, her braids bounced, and her bare feet slapping softly against the polished floor. And Emily was transformed. Her eyes sparkled. She wasn't just watching, she was alive. She tapped her hands to an invisible beat, her cheeks flushed with joy, her lips parted in laughter that filled the cold mansion with warmth. For a long moment, Richard simply stood there. His instinct, the instinct of a man who controlled everything, was to step in, to stop what wasn't supposed to happen in his ordered world. What was a maid's daughter doing here distracting his child? Was this even proper? But another instinct, one buried under years of grief and distance, stopped him. His heart. He saw something money had failed to give Emily. Doctors, therapists, teachers, none of them had given her this. They had tried to heal her body, but this little girl was healing her soul. Richard's